starting in verse 1. This is the story of Namin. It says, Namin, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naman's wife. She said to her mistress, Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy. So Naaman went in and told his Lord, Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel, and the king of Syria said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, Am I God, to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, Wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. So, anybody in here a fan of the show Dirty Jobs? Y'all seen this show? Yeah? Okay. This is a show that was on the Discovery Channel. I don't think it's on anymore, but it was hosted by a guy named Mike Rowe. And now what Mike would do basically was he would go and find the dirtiest, nastiest, filthiest jobs he could in the whole country. And he would go and he would work these jobs for a day. Now, I don't know that I'm a fan of this show. Really, it kind of made me sick. I get kind of queasy with things like this. But I watched an interview yesterday, Bill O'Reilly interviewing Mike, asking him about the worst jobs he had to work during his 8 seasons on the show. And so he talked about several of them. One of them was a sewer inspector in San Francisco. And so basically Mike would explore the sewers underneath the grounds of the streets in San Francisco. And if you've been there or if you've seen Full House or something, you know that the roads are not all flat. They kind of go up and down like this. And so Mike said that the sewer lines would go with the flow of the streets. And so he might be crawling up a sewer as stuff is running down at him, or he might have to go down a sewer and just have to kind of slide down with everything. And he would be fixing cracks in the sewer, and somebody somewhere would flush and would come out and hit him in the face. And nasty. Another job he talked about was a snake wrangler. For some reason, these guys would capture these water snakes. They would have to make the snakes vomit so that they could then inspect the vomit under a microscope and ensure that the snakes were healthy. I'm thinking, what are we doing here? Like, there has to be a better way to make sure these snakes are healthy rather than capturing them, being bitten several times, and then inspecting their vomit. Then he talked about the horse inseminator. I don't want to get into details on what that means, and if you know what that means, I'm so sorry. If you don't know what it means, God bless you. Don't Google it. Okay, your life is just fine without knowing what that means. Then there was the shark suit tester, and this is kind of a new invention that I just didn't understand why it was a thing. But so they put Mike in this suit made of steel, and they said, okay, now you're going to jump in this shark-infested water. You're going to create a pool of blood and dead fish around you, and the sharks are going to come bite you. We will know that the suit is successful if you survive. And if you don't, well, then there's some adjustments we have to make on the suit. And he's like, okay, that sounds like a great idea, and he jumps in. And sure enough, like hundreds of sharks come, they're biting him, they're attacking him, and I'm just thinking like, why don't we just not jump in the water with the sharks and then we don't need the shark suit? Like what? I don't get this. I watched an episode yesterday where he's at this skull cleaning factory where all they do is clean the skeletons of dead animals. Like they dip it in this big giant tub of hot, bleachy water. And so he walks in, he's like, what's in this tub? And he says, well, in here are 2 bison skulls and a full horse. And so they go and they pull out this big bison skull, and the flesh is coming off of it, and they're peeling it off. And then they put it in this bucket full of little beetles, and the beetles crawl around the skull and are eating all the flesh off the bones. And I'm done. This is not my thing. I watch this show and I'm on the border of being totally engaged and then also like nauseous, because I'm not cut out for jobs like this. Mike might be, but I certainly am not. And it's one thing to keep from doing something because you're simply not cut out for it. Now, that's respectable, but it's another thing entirely for God to command us to do something and for us to reject it because we think we are above the given task. This is where we find Namin in 2 Kings chapter 5. So who is Namin? Well, Namin is the commander of the Syrian army. Verse 1 tells us that he was a mighty man of valor, that he was a great man with his master and in high favor, because the Lord had given victory to Syria. You might remember a little bit earlier, 1 Kings chapter 22, the king of Israel at the time is King Ahab, and he wants to go to battle against Syria. And so there's a prophet named Micaiah. Micaiah comes and says, listen, this is not a good idea. If you go and do this, you will die. You will lose. Don't do it. But Ahab ignores Micaiah. He goes anyway. And when he goes to battle, instead of King Ahab sitting where the king would normally sit, to where everybody could see him and know that he was the king, he switches places with another soldier. And so King Ahab is just in the midst of the battle looking like all the other soldiers, so the enemy can't find him. But 1 Kings tells us that one of the Syrian soldiers draws his bow and just randomly lets an arrow fly. And this destined arrow finds a gap in King Ahab's armor and pierces his heart and kills him. Now, some scholars believe that this soldier was Namin. This can't be proven 100%, but we do know that at some point during this battle that Namin did something that helped Syria defeat Israel in this particular battle. And so he comes home and he's a hero. He's got everything. He is held in high esteem by the king. Everybody knows him. Everybody loves him. But of all the positive things we can say about Namin, the one negative thing rings louder than all the others. He is a leper. He has a disease. He has an affliction. He is unclean. Now the Syrians, it tells us that during one of their raids, had carried off a little girl, a little Israelite girl. Kind of a sad situation. You know, this little girl, probably no older than 12 years old, is captured. She's ripped away from her home, from her family, from her friends. And now she's living as a servant in Naaman's house for Naaman's wife. But this little girl, it's such an incredible thing she does. She puts aside her situation, all the things that have happened to her, and she is concerned with Naaman's health, the man that captured her and kidnapped her. And she says, hey, there's this prophet back home in Israel. He could probably heal you if you go and talk to him. And see, we're going to find as we continue through the story that God's saving activity is at work, especially in Naaman's life. And this little girl is one character that participates in that activity. She may not know it, but she is allowing herself to be used by God in the life of Naaman. Now, there are other characters who are not so in tune with what God is doing. But this little girl allows herself to be used in God's saving activity. So Naaman goes to his king. He says, hey, I'd like to travel. I'd like to go visit this prophet in Israel and try to get healed. And so the king says, okay, I'll write a letter. Why don't you pack up your stuff, take some gifts to give to the king. And so they travel to Samaria. And he goes to the king of Israel, who is at this time is King Jehoram. It says that the king reads the letter, and he tore his clothes. He says, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me. So this king of Israel, he knows God. He knows the power God has. He should be in tune with God's saving activity, but he misses what God is doing here. He reads this letter and is thinking very much about himself. He's thinking about his people. He likely knows who Naaman is. He remembers the Syrian army defeating his army. And so now when Naaman comes and wants to be healed, he's thinking, what is he trying to do here? This king knows that I cannot possibly heal this person. Only God can do that. And so his first thought is, oh, he's trying to make me look bad. This is an act of war. He's going to ask me to do this, and when I cannot, he's going to come after me. He's going to come attack me. Now, thankfully, Elisha is in tune with what God is doing. And so in verse 8, Elisha intercedes. It says, but when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, you dummy. Not really. He says, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me that he may know there is a prophet in Israel. Elisha is in tune with God's saving activity. One of the popular sitcoms that's on right now is How I Met Your Mother. Actually, it just ended last year, but really popular show for people our age. And the premise of the show, if you haven't seen it, the main character's name is Ted, and the whole show is him telling his kids stories about how he met their mother. And so in one particular episode I watched just last week, it's called The Curse of the Blitz. And so Ted and his best friend Marshall, they had a friend in college who every time they were hanging out, this friend would be the first one to leave. And so he would leave, and every time he would leave, something incredible would happen. And he would miss the entire thing because he left early. And so it became a curse, and so they gave him the nickname the Blitz because he would leave early and miss everything. And so in this particular episode, it's the current day, and this particular friend is hanging out with the 5 main friends of the show, and they're hanging out in the bar, which is where they always hang out. But this particular night, Ted is the one who leaves early first. And so Ted wakes up the next morning and finds out that his friends had the most incredible, unforgettable night they've ever had, and he missed the entire thing because he left early. And so he learns that after he leaves, they're hanging out in the bar, and one of the beer taps break, and so the bartender is just filling up mugs with beer, just handing it out because it's going everywhere. And so they all get free beer the entire night. Then at some point, there's a dog that comes rolling through the bar on a skateboard, and Ted's like, oh man, a dog on a skateboard, how did I miss that? And he missed this incredible night. But it doesn't last long because one of Ted's friends named Barney, the curse goes to Barney because Barney leaves the group first at one point. And so the rest of the group is in a taxi cab, and they end up in the middle of the Thanksgiving Day parade somehow. They get to be a part of the whole parade, and it's this crazy thing. And then at another point, Barney leaves the room just for a minute, and somebody flips a coin, and it lands on its side right on the table, which is this incredible thing. And see, if we're not careful as ministers, if we are not in tune with what God is doing, we run the risk of the curse of the blitz, or we miss everything God is doing right around us. We need to be in tune with what God is doing. We need to be constantly asking, how can I participate in what you're doing? Who can I talk to? Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do so that I can be involved in your saving activity? So Namin comes to Elisha. Came with his horses, his chariots. He stood at the door. Elisha sent a messenger saying, go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Your flesh shall be restored. You shall be clean. Verse 11 says, Namin was angry. He went away, saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me, stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. You see, Namin is offended. The language here suggests that Naman's ego is wounded. He's this prideful man, this hero, that he's used to when he walks into the room, all the attention is on him. He can get whatever he wants. Everything is dramatic, everything is big, everything is grandiose, but here he comes to the door, right? He's got his posse with him. They're all in their tricked out chariots, right? 22-inch rims, big fancy horses. And meanwhile, upstairs, Elisha is probably doing a Bible study or something, and here's the commotion. Looks out the window. He's like, I don't have time to mess with this guy. So he tells his servant, he says, hey, just go tell him, go jump in the river. I think that'll work, right? And so the messenger goes and tells Namin this, and Namin is offended. He's angry. In fact, it's an issue of national pride. In verse 12, he says, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? He's thinking, the Jordan River? You want me to go to that dirty, nasty Jordan River and jump in there 7 times? See, of all the things he's done, this task is too simple for Namin. He's thinking, if this is all I have to do, I got better rivers back home I can go swim in. Is this really all I have to do to be healed? Fortunately, his servants are there, and they kind of call him out. And they say, did he really only say, go wash and be clean? Like, is that the only thing you have to do to be healed of this entire thing? You see, we don't know Namin very well, but his servants clearly do, and they challenge him, and they say, if he would have told you to do some complicated, difficult task, you probably would have done it, because that's the type of person you are. You're an army guy, you're a hero. If this was a go save the girl by slaying the dragon type mission, you would do it and do it gladly because you get to show off a little bit. But this is just a simple task. He's saying, just go jump in this dirty water and clean yourself up. Namin has a change of heart. Verse 14 tells us that he goes, dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. I can't help but see a comparison there between Namin, his flesh being restored like a little child, and the girl back at the beginning of the story that was the first character to be used by God to speak to Namin. His flesh is restored like a little child, but I can't help but think that his faith, he's now on a journey like that of a little child, like this little girl at the beginning of the story. See, this is the way that God cleanses people of affliction. Not in a dramatic performance, but by simple acts of obedience. Namin has been on an incredible journey already, just in a few short verses. I mean, he has led his Syrian army to defeat the army of the Israelites, which doesn't happen very often, but God allows him to defeat them. He comes back, he's the hero, he's got everything. He's got the girls, the glory, the fame. He's got everything he wants, everybody loves him, but he has this disease. He's hanging in the balance between being a hero and being an outcast. And so this little girl that he captured, this little Israelite girl, says to him, hey, I have a way for you to get healed. And so he listens to her, because who wouldn't listen to a little 12-year-old girl that they just captured? And so he says, I want to go. So he travels. He speaks to the king. The king reads a letter. He thinks that Naaman's trying to pick a fight with him. And Naaman's like, I'm really not. I just want to get healed. And so finally he goes to see Elisha. He knocks on the door. He's got everybody there. He's waiting for this big dramatic experience. Elisha sends the messenger down. The messenger says, hey, just go take a bath. That's all it takes. And Naaman is angry. He's offended. And we read this and we think, Naaman, this is such a simple thing. Why can you not just do this? I mean, you've risked so much to get to this point, and now the task is so simple, yet you won't do it. But how many times have we, in ministry, looked at such a simple task and said, I can do so much more than that. I've worked so hard to get to this point, and now this is the task you have for me? We think, I have a degree. I've grown up in church. I've done this. Let somebody else do this that isn't as experienced as I am. I'm about to have a master of divinity. Or we think, I'm in preaching 2 right now. There should be churches all over the country calling me, asking me to come grace them with my presence because of all the things I've done. But God calls us to simple tasks. He calls us to make hospital visits and to volunteer for VBS, or to serve teenagers who are so good at making messes and so terribly bad at saying thank you for cleaning up after them. I've been at the church I'm at now for almost 3 years, and when I first got there, of course, you want everybody to like you, especially the teenagers, and so we would have people bring snacks for them, and if snacks weren't there, I would just run next door to the grocery store and buy some chips or cookies or whatever. But man, for some reason, they enjoyed throwing the cookies and smashing the chips into the ground much more than they enjoyed eating them, and I don't understand that. And so every night, there was 20 or 30 minutes of cleanup, just trying to get cookies out of the carpet, or cleaning up pop spilled on the gym floor, cleaning Cheese Whiz off the wall. I don't know how it got there, but it did somehow. But these are the tasks that we are called to. This is how people are saved, through simple tasks of obedience. This is how God changes things. This is how churches grow. This is how God does extraordinary things through ordinary people, by simple tasks of obedience. I'll close with this. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Jordan River is where Namin is told to go. You all, I'm sure, are aware of the significance of the Jordan River throughout Scripture. I'm reminded of the Israelites finally getting to enter the promised land in the book of Joshua. and they cross the Jordan River in order to get there. This is a long-awaited moment. Represents a promise fulfilled, a people delivered. And here we have Namin, a man who is a hero but also an outcast, and he goes and is told to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. 7 being the biblical number of completion, of perfection, of fulfillment. Fast forward 900 years or so, and this is the very river that Jesus will come and be baptized himself, symbolizing the beginning of his ministry. And it's fascinating how Namin, when he enters the Jordan River, he's dirty, he's diseased, he's afflicted. But when he comes up out of that dirty water, he's clean, he's pure, he's complete. But when Jesus enters the Jordan River, Jesus is complete. He is perfect. He is righteous. But when he comes up, it symbolizes the beginning of his ministry, which, as we know, ends with him taking on the filth and the grime of the sin of all of humanity. Jesus' baptism is accounted in all 4 Gospels in some form or fashion, but Luke chapter 4 is especially interesting in light of the story of Namin. So Jesus is baptized, he comes up, his ministry begins. He's immediately tempted by the devil. But then he goes to Nazareth to preach in the synagogue. He is rejected by his own people. But then he gets up and he opens the scroll of Isaiah, and he reads this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovering the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. It says he rolls up the scroll and hands it back to the attendant there. And he stands up and he says, today this scripture is being fulfilled in your presence. All that the Old Testament has been talking about is being fulfilled today by me. But he says, I have come for the poor, for the captives. I've come for the outcasts. And of course they question him. And so he goes on to verse 24. He says this. He says, truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown. But in truth I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. Now here it is, verse 27. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them were cleansed, but only Namin the Syrian. Now, other than Naman's story in 2 Kings and a few genealogies, this is the only other time that Naman is mentioned in all of Scripture. And Jesus is saying, listen, back then in the time of Elisha, there were many Israelite lepers that he could have healed, but God only had him heal Naman the Syrian, the outcast. He's trying to show them that God's saving activity was beginning long before Jesus would ever walk the earth. And it's available to the outcasts, to the outsiders. And now Jesus has come to do the same thing. Today, God is still in the business of healing people, calling people to himself, redeeming people. And if we stay in tune with God and commit to simple acts of obedience, then we can also participate in God's saving activity.